The guard's hand trembled as he lifted the corner of the velvet cloth. Beneath it lay something that shouldn't exist. Something the palace had supposedly destroyed decades ago. His radio crackled on his belt, and he flinched, stepping back from the display case. He was alone in the corridor. He'd only been doing his rounds. But now he held knowledge that could unravel carefully guarded secrets. Secrets that reached the highest levels of the royal family. His supervisor's words echoed in his mind from that morning's briefing. Some rooms in the palace exist only in memory now. Some doors were sealed for a reason. He looked down at what he'd found, his pulse hammering in his throat. If anyone discovered he'd seen this, his career would end before sunrise. Or worse. Because this wasn't just history. It was a warning. And it had Catherine's name written across the top. Officer James. Whitmore had served in the Royal Guard for 11 years without incident. He knew every corridor of Buckingham Palace, every painting, every protocol. He'd stood watch during state banquets, royal weddings, and moments of national mourning. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. It was February 2026, and the palace was preparing for a private exhibition commemorating what would have been Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday. The exhibition wasn't open to the public. It was intended only for senior members of the royal family and a select group of historians. Display cases lined the East Gallery, filled with personal items from the late Queen's life. Photographs, correspondence, her favorite brooches, a handwritten speech from her coronation. James had been assigned the night shift. Midnight to 6 in the morning? His job was simple. Patrol the gallery every hour, ensure the climate control systems were functioning, and report any irregularities. The palace felt different at night. The tourists were gone. The staff had retreated to their quarters. In the silence, you could hear the building breathe. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. On his second patrol of the night, James noticed something unusual. One of the display cases near the center of the gallery sat slightly askew. The velvet cloth that draped over it had shifted, revealing a corner of something beneath. He approached carefully, his boots silent on the polished floor. The case wasn't part of the main exhibition. It had no placard, no description card, just a number written in pencil on a piece of tape. 1947. James glanced over his shoulder. The corridor stretched empty in both directions. He lifted the velvet cloth carefully, expecting perhaps a misplaced artifact or a piece waiting to be catalogued. What he found made his breath catch. It was a map, but not an ordinary map. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still crisp. It showed the layout of Buckingham Palace, but with details he'd never seen in any official diagram. Corridors that didn't appear on modern floor plans. Staircases that seemed to lead nowhere. And in the lower right corner, drawn in careful script, was a series of rooms marked with a small crown symbol. James knew he shouldn't touch it. Everything in the exhibition was catalogued, photographed, protected, but something about the map drew him closer. He pulled out his phone and took a quick photograph. Zooming in on the unusual markings, that's when he saw the note. It was tucked beneath the map, written on a small card in elegant handwriting. The ink was faded but legible. For the future Princess of Wales. When the time comes, she will understand. The key lies where the corgis slept. ER 2022, James's heart hammered against his ribs. ER Elizabeth Regina. The late Queen herself had written this. But why? And why was it hidden in an unmarked case, separate from the rest of the exhibition? He photographed the note as well, his hands shaking slightly. Then he carefully replaced the velvet cloth exactly as he'd found it. He continued his patrol as if nothing had happened. But his mind raced with questions. The next morning, James returned home to his flat in South London. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the map, about the note, about the crown symbol's marking rooms he'd never seen. He opened the photographs on his phone and studied them carefully. The map showed a section of the palace he knew well. The ground floor, near the picture gallery. But according to the drawing, there was a corridor that branched off from the main hall. A corridor that, in his 11 years of service, he'd never noticed. It was marked with 3 small crowns and a single word. Private. James knew he should report what he'd found. Protocol demanded it. But something held him back. The note specifically mentioned the Princess of Wales, Catherine, and it was dated 2022, less than a year before the Queen's death. This wasn't ancient history. This was recent, intentional. He made a decision that would change everything the following night. During his shift, James went searching. He returned to the picture gallery and stood in the exact spot indicated on the map. The walls were lined with portraits, Flemish masters, English landscapes, royal commissions spanning centuries. He studied each panel, each section of wall, looking for something out of place. Then he found it. A seam in the woodwork, so subtle that in the dim gallery lighting, it was almost invisible. He pressed his hand against it, and the panel gave slightly, as if on hinges. James froze. His radio crackled. "Whitmore, status check." He stepped back from the wall, his heart pounding. "All clear. East gallery secure. Copy that." He waited until the radio fell silent again. Then he pressed the panel once more, harder this time. It clicked, and with a soft whisper of old hinges, it swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. James stared into that darkness, knowing that whatever lay beyond was something the palace had hidden for decades. Something only the late Queen had remembered, and something that, according to her own handwriting, was meant for Catherine alone. James stood at the threshold for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct told him to close the panel, forget what he'd seen, and finish his shift in silence. But curiosity pulled at him like a physical force. The Queen herself had left this map. She'd written that note. There was a reason. He pulled out his torch and aimed it into the darkness. The beam illuminated a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for one person. The walls were plain plaster, painted a dull cream that had yellowed with age. The floor was bare wood, thick with dust. No one had walked here in years, perhaps decades. James glanced back at the gallery. One last time. Empty. Silent. He stepped through the opening. The air inside was stale and cool. His torch beams swept across the walls, revealing nothing except aging paint and the occasional water stain. The corridor stretched about 20 feet before ending at a door. It was old, heavy oak, with iron hinges that had gone black with tarnish. There was no handle. Just a small keyhole beneath a tarnished brass plate. James approached the door and examined the plate. Engraved in script so small he had to lean close to read it, were 3 words. For Wales alone. His breath caught. Wales. The title held by the heir to the throne. First by Charles, then by William, and by extension, their wives. Diana, Camilla, Catherine. But the note in the exhibition had been specific. It was meant for the Princess of Wales. For Catherine, James tried the door, but it didn't budge. Locked, as expected. He shone his torch around the frame, looking for any other clues. That's when he noticed the scratches on the floor near the base of the door. Fresh scratches. Recent. Someone else had been here. His radio crackled again, making him jump. "Whitmore, I need you on the ground floor. Possible alarm malfunction in the staterooms." James exhaled slowly. "On my way." He backed out of the corridor, pulled the panel closed, and heard it click into place. Within seconds, he was back in the gallery, walking at a measured pace toward the staterooms. His mind churned with questions. But his face remained neutral, professional. The alarm turned out to be a false trigger, a sensor detecting movement that wasn't there. James reset it, logged the incident, and continued his patrol. But for the rest of his shift, all he could think about was that door, that lock, and the question of what lay beyond it. When his shift ended at dawn, James didn't go home. Instead, he went to the staff library in the palace's administrative wing. It was a small room filled with historical documents, floor plans, and architectural records. Officially, it was for researchers and senior staff only. But James had befriended the archivist months ago, and she sometimes let him browse during quiet hours. He found what he was looking for in a leather-bound volume, dated 1947, the same year marked on the hidden display case. The book contained detailed architectural plans of Buckingham Palace, including modifications made after World War II. Many rooms had been damaged during the Blitz. Others had been repurposed. Entire sections of the palace had been sealed off or rebuilt. James turned the pages carefully, comparing them to the photograph of the map on his phone, and there it was. A corridor marked private access, restricted. But unlike the modern floor plans, this older document showed what lay beyond the locked door. It was labeled simply as the Queen's Archive, not the main royal archives, which were well known and meticulously maintained. This was something else, a personal collection. And according to the notes in the margin, access was restricted to the reigning monarch and designated heirs only. James felt a chill run down his spine. He was looking at something that had been deliberately hidden from official records, removed from modern plans, erased from institutional memory. Yet the late Queen had remembered, and in her final years, she'd left a map, a note, an invitation. But why? James photographed the page, then closed the book and returned it to the shelf. He left the library and walked through the palace grounds as morning lights spilled across the gardens. Staff members were beginning their day. Gardeners pruned the roses. Kitchen workers unloaded deliveries. The palace was waking up, returning to its rhythms. But James felt like he was moving through a different world now. A hidden world that existed beneath the surface of royal routine. Over the next 3 days, James researched everything he could find about the late Queen's final years. He read articles, watched interviews, studied timelines. In 2022, when she'd written that note, the Queen had been in her 90s. Her health was declining, but her mind remained sharp. She'd known her time was limited, and apparently she'd taken steps to preserve something, to pass something on. But why leave it in an unmarked case? Why not simply hand it to Catherine directly? Why this elaborate hidden path? The answer came to James on his 4th night back on duty. He was standing in the East Gallery again, staring at the display case, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find a senior palace official, a woman named Margaret Ashford, approaching. She was in her 60s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of authority that came from decades of royal service. "Officer Whitmore," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I understand you've been spending extra time in this gallery." James's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Just ensuring everything is secure, ma'am. The exhibition is important." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Indeed it is. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual?" The question hung in the air between them. James knew this was a test. He could lie, deny everything, or he could take a risk. "There's an unmarked case," he said carefully. Number 1947. It wasn't included in the catalog. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "And did you look inside?" James nodded. "I saw a map and a note." For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What you found, Officer Whitmore, was not meant to be discovered yet. But perhaps that's precisely why it was placed where you could find it." James frowned. "I don't understand." "Her Majesty was many things," Margaret said softly. "But above all, she was strategic. She knew that secrets kept too tightly eventually die. She needed someone outside the family. Someone trustworthy. Someone who could act as a catalyst when the time was right." A catalyst for what? Margaret glanced toward the hidden panel in the wall, though there was no way she should have known it was there. Unless she'd known all along. "The Princess of Wales needs to know what's behind that door," Margaret said. "But she cannot be told directly. Royal protocol forbids it. The information must come to her naturally, organically, as if by chance." She paused. "You've already found the map. Now you must help her find the key." James felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. "You knew about this? You knew I'd find it?" Margaret's expression remained unreadable. "Let's just say that certain arrangements were made. Her Majesty had contingencies in place. People she trusted to carry out her final wishes, even if they didn't fully understand them at the time. But why me? I'm just a guard. Exactly, Margaret said. You're not family. You're not political. You have no agenda except duty. That makes you perfect for this task. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The late Queen left instructions. When the anniversary exhibition was assembled, that case was to be placed in a specific location. Slightly out of position, visible to someone on night patrol, but not obvious to casual observers. She knew that a diligent guard would notice, would investigate. James shook his head, trying to process it all. And the note mentioned a key. Something about where the corgis slept. For the first time, Margaret's expression softened slightly. Her Majesty's corgis were her constant companions. Even near the end, they stayed close to her. They had their own quarters, of course. A small suite of rooms in the private residence. When she passed, those rooms were preserved exactly as they were. A memorial of sorts. Very few people are allowed inside, and the key is there. I don't know, Margaret admitted. Her Majesty shared very little about her final arrangements. She trusted that the right people would understand her clues when the time came. All I know is what I've told you, and that you must find a way to bring this information to the Princess of Wales without raising suspicion or breaking protocol. James felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. How am I supposed to do that? I can't just approach her. I'm not even assigned to the family's personal security. You'll find a way, Margaret said. You found the map, didn't you? Follow the Queen's clues. They'll lead you where you need to go. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Officer Whitmore. There are people within the palace who would prefer this matter stay buried. People who believe some secrets are better left undisturbed. Be careful who you trust. With that, she walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. James stood alone in the gallery, his mind racing. He looked down at the display case, at the velvet cloth concealing the map and note beneath. The late Queen had orchestrated this from beyond the grave. She'd created a puzzle, a path that only the right person could follow. And somehow, James had become part of it. He spent the rest of his shift lost in thought. When dawn came, he didn't go home. Instead, he made his way to the palace's staff archives once more. This time, he searched for information about the Queen's corgis. Their names. Their living arrangements. Anything that might point him toward the key. He found photographs from various years. The Queen, walking with her dogs in the gardens. Sitting with them in her private study. The corgis had their own beds, their own bowls, their own veterinary records, meticulously maintained. But the note had said where the corgis slept, past tense, as if referring to a specific place. Now, gone. James discovered that the Queen's final two corgis, Muick and Sandy, had been rehomed after her death. They'd gone to live with Prince Andrew and his family at Royal Lodge. Their quarters in Buckingham Palace had been emptied and cleaned, then quietly sealed, preserved as a private memorial, just as Margaret had said. But how was he supposed to access those rooms? They were in the private residence, areas strictly off-limits to regular staff. Only senior household members and the royal family themselves had access. James couldn't simply walk in and start searching. He needed a legitimate reason to be there. An official purpose. The answer came 2 days later during a staff briefing. The palace was preparing for a private dinner honoring conservation charities. The Princess of Wales would be attending. She'd requested a tour of some of the Queen's personal quarters beforehand, as part of her ongoing efforts to preserve the late Queen's legacy and charitable work. Security would need to sweep the rooms in advance. James volunteered immediately. His supervisor raised an eyebrow but approved the assignment. After all, James had an impeccable service record, and the private residence needed thorough security checks before any royal visit. The day before the dinner, James found himself standing outside the suite that had once housed the Queen's beloved corgis. Another guard stood with him, a younger officer named Thomas. Together, they unlocked the door and stepped inside. The rooms were exactly as Margaret had described, untouched, frozen in time. Small dog beds lined one wall, each embroidered with a name. Food bowls sat empty on silver trays. Photographs of the corgis hung on the walls, showing decades of companionship. There was even a small portrait of the queen herself, painted in oils, showing her seated with 3 dogs at her feet. "Bit sad in it," Thomas said quietly. "All this left behind." James nodded, but his attention was elsewhere. He was looking for something specific. A hiding place. Clue. The queen had been clever. She wouldn't have made it obvious. He moved through the rooms slowly, methodically, checking every corner, every surface. Thomas handled the standard security sweep, testing windows and checking for electronic devices. James searched for something else entirely. It was in the smallest room. It must have been a storage closet for dog supplies that he found it. Behind a row of old leashes and collars, tucked into a gap in the wooden paneling, was a small envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy paper, sealed with red wax bearing the royal cipher. James's heart pounded as he carefully extracted the envelope. He glanced over his shoulder. Thomas was in the other room, his back turned. James slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket and continued his sweep as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, alone in his flat, James broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a key. Old brass, ornate, with the same crown symbol he'd seen on the map, and beneath the key was another note in the same elegant handwriting. "This key opens what must be opened, but the door will only yield to Wales. The guard who finds this has done his duty. Now he must ensure it reaches her hand, and hers alone. Trust in timing. Trust in fate. Trust that some truths must surface in their own time." James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the key and the note. He now held the physical object that could unlock the hidden archive. But how was he supposed to give it to Catherine? He couldn't just approach her. Protocol forbade direct contact between lower-ranking guards and senior royals, except in official capacity. He thought about Margaret's words. "You'll find a way." But what way? What possible scenario would allow him to place this key in? Catherine's hand without raising alarms or violating every rule he'd sworn to uphold. The answer came to him in the middle of the night. It was risky. It might cost him his career, but it was the only path he could see. The next evening, during the private dinner, James was assigned a security detail in the corridor outside the dining room. It was standard procedure. Guards posted at intervals, ensuring privacy and safety. Catherine would have to pass him on her way to view the Queen's quarters. James waited, the key and note sealed in a small envelope tucked inside his uniform. His hands were steady, but his pulse hammered in his ears. This was it. The moment the late Queen had orchestrated, perhaps years in advance. When Catherine appeared, walking with 2 ladies in waiting, James straightened to attention. She moved with grace and purpose, her expression thoughtful. As she drew level with him, James did something he'd never done in 11 years of service. He dropped his torch. It clattered to the floor, rolling toward Catherine's feet. She paused, looking down at it, then at James. He immediately stepped forward, bending to retrieve it. "My apologies, Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice steady. As he straightened, he made sure the envelope slipped from his jacket pocket, landing softly near her shoe. Catherine noticed. She glanced down, then at James. For a brief moment, their eyes met. And in that moment, James saw understanding flash across her face. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she already knew this was coming. She bent gracefully and picked up the envelope, holding it delicately between her fingers. "I believe you dropped something, officer," she said quietly. "That's not mine, ma'am," James replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I believe it was meant to find you." Catherine studied him for a long moment, then slipped the envelope into her evening bag. "Thank you for your service," she said formally. But there was warmth in her tone. Recognition. She continued down the corridor with her attendants. James remained at his post, his heart still racing. He'd done it. He'd completed the task the Queen had set in motion. Now it was up to Catherine to follow the path that had been laid out for her. What he didn't know was that Catherine had been searching for answers of her own, and that the key he'd just given her would unlock far more than a forgotten room. Catherine had spent the past 3 months looking for something she couldn't quite name. It had started in November, during a private visit to Windsor Castle. She'd been sorting through some of the late Queen's personal correspondence, part of an ongoing project to preserve family history. Among the letters, she found a sealed envelope with her name written on it in the Queen's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "When you find what's hidden, you'll understand why some doors must remain closed until the right moment." No explanation. No context. Just that cryptic message and a date, February 22/6. Catherine had puzzled over it for weeks. She'd searched through the Queen's papers, consulted with archivists, even spoken quietly with Prince William about it. But William had no answers. The Queen had apparently kept this secret even from him, and now, standing in the corridor of Buckingham Palace, holding the envelope that the guard had somehow passed to her, Catherine felt the pieces beginning to align. She excused herself from her attendance, citing a need for a private moment, and slipped into a small sitting room. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope. The key fell into her palm, heavy and cold. The note explained everything. Well, not everything, but enough. There was a hidden archive, a door that only she could open. And the late Queen had wanted her to find it. Catherine read the note 3 times, committing every word to memory. Then she tucked it and the key safely into her bag. Her mind raced with questions. But one thought dominated all others. She needed to find that door tonight. The dinner seemed to last forever. Catherine smiled, made conversation, honored the conservation charities as planned. But her thoughts were elsewhere. In her bag, the key seemed to pulse with significance. When the evening finally concluded, she made her excuses and requested a private tour of the East Gallery. The anniversary exhibition, she explained, deserved her personal attention. The palace staff were accommodating, as always. 2 security officers escorted her to the gallery. Catherine recognized one of them immediately, Officer Whitmore. The man who had given her the envelope. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away, professional and distant. But she saw the question there. Would she understand what to do next? Catherine moved through the gallery slowly, pausing at various displays. She admired photographs, read plaques, gave every appearance of a thorough examination. All the while she was watching, waiting for the right moment. The 2 guards maintained their posts at either end of the gallery. Giving her space, she found the display case marked 1947 beneath the velvet cloth. Just as she somehow knew it would be, was the map. She studied it carefully, memorizing the layout. The hidden corridor, the locked door, the crown symbols. Then she replaced the cloth and continued her tour. When she reached the picture gallery, she paused before a portrait of Queen Victoria. "I'd like a moment alone here, please," she said to the guards. This was one of Her Majesty's favorite paintings. "I'd like to pay my respects quietly." The guards withdrew to a respectful distance. Catherine was alone in the gallery. She approached the wall, where the map indicated the hidden panel would be. Her fingers traced the woodwork, searching, and then she found it. The seam, the subtle gap. She pressed, and the panel clicked open. Catherine glanced back. The guards were out of sight, stationed at the corridor's entrance. She slipped through the opening and into the darkness beyond. The narrow corridor was exactly as the map had shown. Catherine used her phone's light to navigate, moving quickly but carefully. The door at the end waited for her, old and imposing. She pulled out the key, and her hand trembled slightly as she inserted it into the lock. The key turned with surprising smoothness, as if the mechanism had been maintained despite decades of disuse. The door swung inward with barely a sound, revealing a room beyond. Catherine stepped inside and found a light switch. Old fixtures flickered to life, illuminating a space that took her breath away. It was a library, but not like any library she'd ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves containing leather-bound journals, photograph albums, and document boxes. A large desk sat in the center, its surface covered with a protective cloth, and on every available surface were personal items. Jewelry boxes, letters tied with ribbon, small portraits in silver frames. This was the Queen's true archive. Her private history. Catherine moved deeper into the room, her footsteps echoing softly. She removed the cloth from the desk and found it arranged as if someone had just stepped away. Papers were stacked neatly. A fountain pen lay waiting, and in the center, in a position of prominence, was a leather journal with Catherine's title embossed in gold on the cover, Princess of Wales. Catherine sat down at the desk and opened the journal with trembling hands. The first page bore a handwritten note dated September 2022, just days before the Queen's death. "My dear Catherine," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have found what I hoped you would find, and you have done so at the right time, in the right way. There are things you need to know, things about your role, your future, and the true weight of the title you carry. What I'm about to share with you has been kept secret for generations. Each Princess of Wales has learned these truths in her own time, some too late, others not at all. I hope to spare you that pain." Catherine read on, her eyes widening with each sentence. The Queen wrote about Diana, about her struggles, her isolation, her desperate search for purpose within the rigid confines of royal life. She wrote about secrets that Diana had uncovered, secrets that had frightened her and eventually contributed to her pulling away from the family. But more than that, the Queen wrote about a tradition, a legacy, something that belonged specifically to those who held the title. Princess of Wales. It was a role that carried responsibilities beyond public duties. Responsibilities that connected to centuries of history. Two power structures within the monarchy that weren't written in any official document. The Princess of Wales, the Queen explained, was meant to be the bridge. The intermediary between the monarch and the people, between tradition and change, between the past and the future. It was a role that required not just grace and duty, but genuine understanding of the monarchy's hidden mechanisms. Diana had begun to understand this, but she'd been given the information too suddenly, too late, without proper context or support. It had overwhelmed her, frightened her, made her question everything. The Queen had vowed not to make that same mistake with Catherine, and so she'd created this archive, a place where Catherine could learn gradually, at her own pace, with the full context of history surrounding her. Catherine turned the pages, absorbing information that rewrote her understanding of her own position. She learned about financial trusts that had been established centuries ago, controlled jointly by the monarch and the Princess of Wales. She learned about diplomatic channels that existed outside official government protocols. She learned about the true extent of the royal family's influence, not through political power, but through carefully cultivated networks of charity, patronage, and personal connection. She learned why Diana had felt so trapped, and why she, Catherine, needed to understand these things now, while she still had time to prepare for what was coming, because William would be king one day, sooner than anyone wanted to think about. And when that happened, Catherine's role would transform. She would become Queen Consort. Yes, but more than that, she would become the custodian of everything in this room, the keeper of secrets, the guardian of the invisible power structure that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change. The Queen's journal made it clear. Catherine had been chosen carefully, watched, evaluated. The long engagement, too. William hadn't been about hesitation or protocol. It had been a test. Could she handle the pressure? Could she maintain grace under scrutiny? Could she be trusted with the truth? She had passed, and now the full weight of that trust was being placed in her hands. Catherine read for hours. She moved through the room, pulling journals from shelves, reading entries written by previous queens and princesses. She found correspondence between Elizabeth II and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, discussing these very matters. She found notes from Queen Mary, from Queen Alexandra, stretching back through generations. Each woman had added to the archive. Each had left guidance for those who would come after, and each had emphasized the same thing. This knowledge was power, but it was also burden. It had to be wielded carefully, wisely, with full awareness of its potential consequences. Among the documents, Catherine found something that made her heart clench, A series of letters from Diana written in the early years of her marriage. The handwriting grew more desperate with each one. She had discovered this room too, but too late. And without proper preparation, the knowledge had broken something inside her. "I feel like I'm drowning," Diana had written in one letter. "Everyone sees the crown, the jewels, the palaces. No one sees the cage. No one understands the weight of what we truly carry. I thought love would be enough. I was so naive." Catherine closed the letter gently, tears pricking her eyes. She understood now why the Queen had gone to such lengths to ensure she found this room in the right way, at the right time. With preparation, with context, with the maturity and stability that came from years of gradual integration into royal life, Diana had been thrown into the deep end at 19. Catherine had been given a decade to learn to swim first. The difference was everything. Catherine looked around the room one last time before leaving. She now understood her true responsibility. Not just to smile and wave. Not just to patron charities and raise her children, but to be the bridge. To hold the invisible threads that connected monarchy to nation. To preserve what needed preserving while adapting what needed adaptation. It was terrifying. And it was exactly what she'd been preparing for all along. Even without knowing it, Catherine emerged from the hidden corridor just before dawn. She'd been in the archive for nearly 6 hours. The guards had changed shifts twice. Officer Whitmore was no longer on duty. But Catherine knew she would need to speak with him. He was part of this now, whether he'd intended to be or not. She made her way back to her private quarters. Her mind still processing everything she'd read. Sleep was impossible. Instead, she sat at her desk and began making notes. Plans. Questions. There was so much to understand. So much to prepare for. But one thing was immediately clear. She needed to tell William. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He needed to know that she'd found something important. Something that the Queen had left specifically for her. She waited until morning, then called him. William was at their residence in Windsor dealing with official paperwork. He answered on the second ring. "Catherine, is everything all right?" "It's early. I need to see you," she said quietly. "Today, it's important." There was a pause. William knew his wife well enough to hear the weight in her voice. "I'll come to you. Give me 2 hours." When William arrived, Catherine led him to a private sitting room and closed the door. She told him about the envelope from Windsor, about the guard who'd passed her the key, about the hidden archive. She watched his face as he processed the information, seeing surprise, confusion, and finally understanding. "The Queen kept this from me," he said slowly. It wasn't quite a question, more an acknowledgement of a truth he was just beginning to grasp. "She kept it from everyone except those who needed to know," Catherine said gently. "And she made sure I would find it when I was ready. When we were ready." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "What did you find in there?" Catherine chose her words carefully. "History. Responsibility. Truth. Things about Diana that we never fully understood. Things about the role of Princess of Wales that go far deeper than public duty. Your grandmother was preparing me, William, for what's coming. For when you become king, show me," he said. Catherine shook her head. "Not yet. The Queen's instructions were specific. This is something I need to understand first on my own. Then we'll navigate it together. But there's a process, a tradition. I have to respect that." William looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Catherine's expression stopped him. He nodded slowly. "You'll tell me when you're ready?" "I promise." That evening, Catherine made arrangements to speak with Officer Whitmore. She couldn't do it directly, of course, but she could request a private security briefing about the anniversary exhibition. Standard procedure for a royal interested in the details of palace security. James arrived at the appointed time, standing at attention in a small office near the administrative wing. Catherine dismissed the other staff members present, leaving just the two of them and one lady-in-waiting positioned discreetly by the door. "Officer Whitmore," Catherine said formally, "I wanted to thank you personally for your diligence regarding the exhibition security." "Just doing my duty, Your Royal Highness." Catherine studied him. He was young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with an honest face and steady eyes. The Queen had chosen well. "I believe you found something that wasn't in the official catalog." "Yes, ma'am." "And you made sure it reached the right person." James met her eyes. "I followed the instructions left for me by someone I trusted more than anyone." Catherine felt a wave of emotion. "She chose carefully, didn't she? The people she brought into this?" "I believe she did, ma'am." Catherine glanced at the lady-in-waiting, who was studiously examining her phone, giving them privacy without leaving the room entirely. "What you've done, Officer Whitmore, matters more than you know. You've helped fulfill her final wishes. And in doing so, you've helped me understand my role in ways I never could have otherwise." "I'm glad." "Ma'am, I want you to know," Catherine continued quietly, "that what you discovered stays between us. The archive, the key, all of it. This information is sensitive. There are people who wouldn't understand. People who might try to use it for their own purposes." James nodded. "I've told no one, and I won't." "I trust you," Catherine said, and she meant it. "If you ever need anything, if anyone questions your actions or your loyalty, you come to me directly." "You've earned that right." "Thank you, Your Royal Highness." Catherine dismissed him with a gracious nod. As James left, she felt a sense of completion. The Queen's plan had worked perfectly. Every piece had fallen into place. The map had been found. The key had been delivered. The archive had been opened. And Catherine now understood what Diana had struggled to understand, that the crown was more than ceremony. It was responsibility, connection, and the careful stewardship of power that most people never saw. Over the following weeks, Catherine returned to the archive several more times. Each visit revealed new layers of understanding. She read about financial arrangements that dated back to Victoria's reign. She learned about the network of personal relationships that had sustained the monarchy through both world wars. She discovered that the Princess of Wales had traditionally served as a channel for communication with charitable organizations, women's groups, social movements that needed royal support, but couldn't go through official channels. It was a role that required discretion, intelligence, and genuine care for people. No wonder Diana had struggled. She'd had the care and the charisma, but she'd been given the responsibility too abruptly. Without proper preparation or support, Catherine also found something unexpected: a series of recorded conversations. The Queen had left audio files on an old recording device tucked away in a drawer. Catherine listened to them alone, in the quiet of the archive, and heard the Queen's voice speaking directly to her. "My dear Catherine," the recording began, "if you're hearing this, then you've found everything I hoped you would find. I wish I could be there to guide you through this personally, but perhaps it's better this way. You'll learn at your own pace, without my opinions coloring your understanding." The Queen spoke for nearly an hour, explaining her reasoning, her fears, her hopes for the future. She talked about watching Catherine over the years, seeing her strength, her resilience, her genuine desire to serve. She talked about the mistakes that had been made with Diana, the lessons learned too late. "You are different," the Queen said. "You came to this life as an adult, with clear eyes and realistic expectations. You've had time to understand William, to understand the institution, to understand yourself. That gives you something Diana never had: a foundation, a sense of who you are beyond the title." The recording ended with a simple message: trust yourself, trust your instincts, and remember that the greatest power you have isn't in any document or tradition. It's in your ability to connect with people, to make them feel seen and heard. That's what the Princess of Wales has always done best. That's what you will do. I have absolute faith in you. Catherine sat in silence after the recording ended, tears streaming down her face. She felt the weight of the Queen's trust, the enormity of the responsibility she'd been given. But she also felt something else: readiness. For the first time, she truly understood her role. Not just the public duties, but the deeper purpose. The invisible work that happened behind palace walls, in quiet conversations, through carefully maintained relationships. She was the bridge between past and future, between monarchy and modernity, between power and people, and she was ready to carry that weight. Before she left the archive that night, Catherine added her own entry to the journal. She wrote about her journey to this moment, about the fear and confusion she'd felt, about the clarity she'd finally found, and she wrote a message for whoever would come after her. The next woman who would hold this title and inherit this responsibility. "Don't be afraid of what you find here," she wrote. "Yes, it's overwhelming. Yes, it changes everything you thought you knew. But it also gives you power, real power. Not the power to command or control, but the power to influence, to guide, to make a difference in ways that matter. Use it wisely. Use it with compassion. And remember that you are never alone in this. Every woman who came before you has walked this path. We are all here with you in these pages, in this history. Trust in that. Trust in yourself." Catherine closed the journal and placed it back on the desk. She looked around the archive one final time, feeling a profound sense of connection to all the women who had stood in this very room before her. Queens and princesses, each carrying secrets, each navigating the impossible balance between duty and humanity. She understood now why the Queen had gone to such lengths to ensure she found this place. Because the truth was that being Princess of Wales meant more than smiling for cameras. It meant being entrusted with the real power structure of the monarchy, the invisible machinery that kept the institution relevant, necessary, and supported by the people. It was a trust that couldn't be given lightly, and it was a trust that Catherine vowed to honor for the rest of her life. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the East Gallery once again. The anniversary exhibition had closed, and the items were being carefully packed away for the archives. The display case marked 1947 had been moved to a secure storage facility, its contents logged and cataloged. Officially, properly, the map and note would be preserved as historical artifacts. Their true significance known to only a handful of people. James Whitmore had been promoted. He now served as part of the senior security detail, working directly with the royal family on major events. It hadn't been Catherine's doing, not directly, but Margaret Ashford had quietly recommended him for advancement, citing his exceptional attention to detail and discretion. No one questioned it. James had earned the promotion through years of exemplary service. He stood now at his new post outside the staterooms. Watching as Catherine passed by with a delegation of foreign dignitaries, she didn't acknowledge him directly, but as she walked past, she offered the smallest nod, a gesture of recognition, of thanks, of shared understanding. James had kept his promise. He'd told no one about the hidden corridor, the archive, or the key. He'd watched as Catherine had transformed over the months that followed, becoming more confident, more assured in her role. There was a depth to her now that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose that went beyond public duty. He wondered sometimes what she'd found in that locked room, what secrets the Queen had left for her. But he knew he would never ask. Some knowledge was meant only for those who carried the crown. What James didn't know was that Catherine had spent those 6 months studying everything in the archive. She'd read every journal, every letter, every document. She'd listened to all the recordings, and she'd begun implementing what she'd learned. The charitable foundations she'd already supported gained new focus. She began reaching out to organizations that previous princesses of Wales had worked with quietly behind the scenes. Women's shelters, mental health initiatives, programs supporting young mothers. She didn't make grand announcements. She simply showed up, listened, and provided support through channels that didn't require press releases or photo opportunities. She also began having conversations, private meetings with influential people in various sectors, business leaders, academics, social activists, people who could affect real change but who often felt disconnected from traditional power structures. Catherine became a bridge, just as the Queen had described. She listened to their concerns and quietly connected them with resources, opportunities, and each other. It was invisible work, the kind that didn't make headlines, but it was profoundly effective. Within months, networks were forming. Collaborations were happening. Real change was beginning to take shape, all radiating outward from Catherine's quiet facilitation. William noticed the change in his wife. She carried herself differently now. with a confidence that came from deep understanding rather than surface performance. When he asked her about it, she smiled and said simply, "I found what your grandmother wanted me to find, and I'm becoming who she always knew I could be." He didn't press for details. He trusted her, and he understood, perhaps better than he'd ever admitted, that some aspects of Catherine's role were hers alone to navigate. One evening, as autumn began to settle over London, Catherine received a letter. It was delivered through official channels, but marked as personal correspondence. The envelope was old-fashioned, sealed with wax. Inside was a single page written in handwriting she recognized from the archive. "Margaret Ashford, Your Royal Highness," the letter began. "I hope this finds you well. I wanted you to know that my role in facilitating Her late Majesty's final arrangements is now complete. Everything she asked of me has been fulfilled. You have found what you needed to find. You have become what she hoped you would become. I am retiring from royal service next month. But before I go, I wanted to share one final piece of information that the Queen asked me to withhold until I was certain you were ready to receive it. The archive you discovered is not the only one. There are others, scattered throughout the royal residences. Windsor, Sandringham, Balmoral, each contains different aspects of the truth. Different pieces of the history and responsibility that belong to the Princess of Wales. Your grandmother-in-law spent decades compiling this knowledge, preserving it, protecting it. She knew that the monarchy's survival depended not on public pageantry, but on the invisible work done by those who truly understood its purpose. She believed you would be the one to carry that work forward into a new era. The keys to the other archives are hidden in places only you can find. Each one is connected to something personal, something meaningful. Follow your instincts. Trust the path that reveals itself to you. And remember, you are not alone in this. Every Princess of Wales who came before you is with you in spirit, guiding you, supporting you. We are all connected through this sacred trust. With deepest respect and admiration, Margaret Ashford. Catherine read the letter 3 times, and carefully folded it and placed it in a locked drawer in her private study. More archives, more secrets, more responsibility. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt right, like pieces of a larger puzzle finally coming into view. She thought about Diana, about all the pain and confusion she'd endured, about how different things might have been if she'd had access to this knowledge, this support, this understanding. Catherine couldn't change the past, but she could honor Diana's memory by ensuring that future princesses of Wales would never feel that same isolation, that same desperate confusion. She made a decision that night. She would continue exploring the archives, learning everything the Queen had left for her, but she would also begin creating her own contributions, recording her own experiences, adding to the wisdom that would be passed down to the next generation. Because someday, perhaps decades from now, another woman would stand in her position. Another person would marry into the royal family and take on the title Princess of Wales. And when that happened, Catherine wanted to make sure they had every possible tool, every piece of knowledge, every word of encouragement they might need. The cycle would continue. The invisible work would persist. The bridge between monarchy and people would be maintained, not through grand gestures or public spectacle, but through quiet dedication, careful stewardship, and genuine understanding of what the role truly meant. As for James Whitmore, he continued his service with quiet pride. He'd played his part in something larger than himself, something that would ripple forward through generations. The Queen had chosen him for a reason, and he'd fulfilled that trust. That was enough. Sometimes late at night, when he walked the palace corridors on his rounds, he would pass by the picture gallery. He would glance at the wall where the hidden panel was concealed, remembering the night he'd first discovered it, remembering the weight of the map in his hands, the key in the envelope. The moment Catherine had understood what he was giving her, he'd never speak of it, never write it down, never share it with anyone. But he carried the knowledge with him always, a secret testimony to the fact that the monarchy's greatest strength wasn't its public face. It was the invisible threads of duty, trust, and carefully guarded wisdom that connected generation to generation. The queen had understood that. She'd spent her final years ensuring those threads remained strong. And now Catherine was weaving them forward into the future. One evening, nearly a year after discovering the first archive, Catherine stood in her private quarters and looked out over the London skyline. The city glittered in the darkness, millions of lives unfolding beneath those lights. Lives that would never know about the hidden archives, the secret responsibilities, the invisible work that sustained the institution they either loved or criticized or simply accepted as part of the landscape. That was as it should be. The people needed to see the crown, the ceremony, the tradition. But they didn't need to see the machinery behind it. They didn't need to understand how much care, how much effort, how much genuine dedication went into maintaining the bridge between past and future. They just needed to feel it, to sense it, to know on some level they couldn't quite articulate that the monarchy still mattered, still served a purpose, still connected them to something larger than themselves. That was Catherine's true responsibility. Not the photo opportunities or the charity galas or the state dinners, but the invisible work of maintaining that connection, of being the bridge, of ensuring that the thread remained unbroken from generation to generation. She thought of the queen, and she whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for trusting me, for preparing me, for giving me the tools I need to carry this forward. I promise I won't let you down." And somewhere in the archives, in the pages of journals written by women who'd carried this same burden across centuries, Catherine's own voice would one day be heard by another princess of Wales, another woman standing at the threshold, uncertain and afraid, wondering if she was strong enough. And Catherine's words would tell her, "Yes, you are. You're exactly who you need to be. Trust yourself. Trust the path. Trust the women who came before you." The invisible work continues. The bridge stands strong. The legacy endures. And the royal guard who found the map, he stands watch still, silent and steady, knowing that some secrets are worth protecting, that some truths are meant only for those who need them. That duty, real duty, isn't always visible, but it's always there, running beneath everything, holding the world together in ways most people will never see. That's the real story of the monarchy. Not the one in newspapers or history books, but the one written in hidden archives, passed down through careful hands, protected by loyal servants, and carried forward by women who understand that their greatest power lies not in what they reveal, but in what they protect. The crown is just metal and jewels, but what it represents, that's eternal. That's what matters. That's what the queen knew, what Catherine now understands, and what future generations will continue to safeguard. The hidden map led to more than just a room. It led to understanding, to purpose, to the truth that has sustained the monarchy through revolutions, wars, and centuries of change. Some doors are meant to stay locked until the right person, at the right time, finds the key. Catherine found hers. And in doing so, she ensured that the next person who searches will find theirs too. The legacy continues. The work endures. And the invisible threads that connect past to future remain strong, protected by those who understand that the greatest service is the kind no one ever sees.